sorry. You alluded to talent dilution earlier. I'm curious to what extent the league has already studied the potential impacts of talent dilution with regard to expansion and what those conclusions might have been, if you can share. But then more broadly, I think we all understand the financial reasons to expand. There's great incentive there. What is the basketball case for expanding, especially at a time when you are still grappling with tanking and a lot of bad teams? And expanding means, almost by definition, if we can judge by the past, adding 2 more bad teams. So what's the basketball case, and what does the dilution study tell you so far?
Yeah, so Howard, it's interesting when you talk about tanking. What's confusing by definition about tanking is it's unclear how bad a team really is, especially when outcomes are being controlled in a way based on incentives to finish further down the standings. And just back to the tanking discussion for a moment, one of the difficulties as we're trying to revise a new system is the team that finishes 30th that much worse than the team that finishes 28th or 26th or 24th or 22nd for that matter. I mean, it's my view that we have ample talent to field 32 competitive teams. I mean, just by one point of comparison, when we last had a 2-team expansion roughly 30 years ago to Canada, 6% of the players in the NBA were international. That's now 30%. So, and along the lines we were talking earlier about basketball in Europe, and the amount of talent coming out of there. I mean, it's, out of the 30% of our players that are international, roughly half of them are from Europe, so that's 15% of our players are European, and obviously some of our very best players, and increasingly we have MVPs coming from outside the United States. So tanking is a confusing one, and it's something we study because it perverts the outcome. So the very essence of tanking is it's unclear what quality teams really have. So I'm not worried about the ability to have 30 competitive teams. Does it make it that much more difficult for a team to win a championship? Yes. On the other hand, as opposed to the old days in the league and going way back, one of the things we talked about is that in the first 65 years of this league, 3 teams won 60% of the championships. Now, over the last 14 years, you've had, I think, 11 different teams have won championships, and you've had 7 different teams over the last 7 years. So there's much more parity that used to exist in the league, and I think ultimately what people want, and that's why tanking is so corrosive. People want to see competition. I'm a big fan of college basketball. Like, I watch a lot of college games where there may be only 1 or 2 players on the floor that could legitimately play at the NBA level. It doesn't take away from my enjoyment of the game, or even to me the quality of the competition on the floor. And ultimately what we're selling is great competition. So it's something we're paying attention to. I think back to that question before, were there any concerns? There was not a strong concern in the room that there wasn't sufficient talent. I mean, I don't want to say that conversation is unrelated to tanking. I do think there was a sense in the room that the expansion process is multi-year. I mean, we hope to make a decision by the end of this year, but at the earliest, you'd have new teams coming in the league at the 28-29 season. But as I said, there was uniformity in the view that we must fix the tanking issue now. And so, I would just say, given the amount of growth in this game globally, you're very familiar with it. You've been covering this game for a long time. Look at whether it's the FIBA World Cup or the Olympic competition, from the old days, the quality of the teams that were competing against the United States till now. Basketball is played everywhere. There's talent everywhere. I think in partly because of digital media, you can discover talent in ways you couldn't historically. There's hardly ever a diamond in the rough anymore. People are aware of where this talent is, regardless of where they are on the planet. So I think, especially given that we're looking at adding these teams in 28, 29, if we do move forward, I don't think there's going to be any issue about the quality of the competition.
Second row, 2 in on the left, Tim.
Hi, Adam. Tim Booth from the Seattle Times.
Hey, Tim.
Was expansion fee brought up as part of the conversation with the owners today, or an expected expansion fee? And do you believe the reports out there of something north of $7 billion and potentially up to $10 billion to be an accurate range for what the fee might end up being?
The only discussion in the room was understanding the math around dilution in terms of projections and what's the direct reduction in existing revenues to teams if we were to expand beginning in 28, 29. We did not discuss franchise value per se in these meetings. Of course, certainly with our bankers, we have a sense of where we think that value exists, but at the end of the day, the marketplace will determine that.
Over on your right, standing, Tim.
Tim Bondos from ESPN. You said earlier that you're going to fix tanking, full stop. You also mentioned in your answer about tanking earlier that you've changed the lottery rules as a league over the past 40 years several times, and we're still in the same position that we're in. You also mentioned the incentives leading teams to act in a certain way. Would you say that as you guys are discussing this over the next month before the special meeting in May to address this, that the only way to actually solve the problem actually this time will be to change the incentives to where winning is the thing that in some form is driving the lottery outcomes, or else are we going to be in a similar situation again where there's not actually a fix?
Yeah, so a few things, Tim. One is, I guess I want to be careful about what you may be suggesting or people may be hearing from me as a, quote, forever fix. The world changes, behavior changes. I don't necessarily think the changes we made over the last 40 years or so were necessarily wrong. I think in some cases they worked for a period of time. And math is math. When we make those changes and change odds, exactly statistically where you're going to come out. What's changed is behavior around those odds. And it may be as the value of franchises has gone up, as I said, as the analytics have gotten more sophisticated, as pressure has come from fan bases to engage in behavior that even team ownership or GMs are not proud of. That's where we find ourselves. And I think in sports or in life, there's a lot that's unpredictable. Having said all that, I think you could describe changes we've made, or certainly the change we made since I've been commissioner, as a step change, an incremental change that we knew was not a dramatic change to the system. As you recall, in fact, when I first became commissioner in 2014, there was a proposal that was put forward by the league office that received a majority of votes from the teams, but did not pass because, I should mention, in order to make a change in the lottery system, it requires 3/4 of the teams. I think where the tension exists and existed back then, and the reason we didn't make the change in 2014 is there is an aspect of team building that is called a genuine rebuild, rebuild with integrity. The problem we're having these days is it's become almost impossible to distinguish between a tank and a rebuild. And Dave Weiss, who's sitting here in front of me, who's sort of been overseeing this process, yes, we find 2 teams right before All-Star, and maybe, that behavior, I think, rose to a level, and I think the teams understood, that required a response from the league office. But there's such a subtlety to this when incentives don't match, when we're now into it with coaches' decisions on lineups and when players come in and out of the game, injuries, doctors going back and forth with each other, pain levels of players, that my sense is when I say fix now, yes, we need to do something more extreme than we did with those incremental changes the last 4 times along. I should leave open the fact that, again, in a sophisticated way, talking to these incredible GMs who have such hard jobs, that a draft is one way to build a team. Of course, there's free agency. And then there's draft, and then there's trading. And there may be aspects of the CBA over time that we need to adjust as well. That's not something we can look at right now. The CBA has at least 4 more years to run, or maybe 3, then it goes longer, there's an opt-out. I'm sure the Players Association has views too on things that they'd want to do differently next time we sit down. So it may be the case that we will do some things, and then depending what happens, in a new collective bargaining agreement, as we have years to think about some potential changes, that there are different ways to build through free agency than exists now, or trade rules change. I will say I really like where the league is right now because, I'm sorry to have to talk about tanking because it takes away from the incredible competition we're seeing from roughly 20 teams in the league right now, going into a wide open playoffs, so many different teams, many media members in this room who cover the league who are, predicting outcomes. It's really exciting basketball. And what's so incredible about live sports at this level, and I think it's why not just the NBA, but we're seeing a rising tide among all premium sports, is that people have this hunger for this live unscripted drama. Of course, the opposite of that is when there's a sense that both teams aren't out there trying to kill themselves to win a game. And so, as I said, we have to fix that problem. I guess I should just, not overstate something that you're going to be asking me a question in 5 years and say, you said this was a forever fix. If I'm the one standing at the podium, I just want to make clear that I recognize things may change. Also because there may be changes that we see through collective bargaining or other changes to the system that may impact on what we're doing now. But certainly, going into next season, the incentives will be completely different than they are now.